The state of Israel was not handed to us on a silver platter. It was established through the loss of much blood, the blood of soldiers who gave their lives so that the Jewish nation would have a small place on the face of the earth to call home. The state of Israel does not forget those to whom it owes its being. On Yom Hazikaron, the country gives honor to all soldiers who have fallen in its wars and stands to salute their memory. This day falls during one of the strongest and most intense weeks for the Jewish community and for Israel. Last Thursday, we marked Yom HaShoah. Tonight and tomorrow, we mark Yom Hazikaron, followed by Yom HaAtzmaut, the celebration of the renewal of the Jewish state in the land of Israel. Mishoah L'Tkuma, from Holocaust to revival. Me'afela La'ora, from darkness to light, adding an extremely historically meaningful chapter to our people's story of resilience. On Yom HaZikaron, we remember those who fell in the struggle for the establishment of the State of Israel and in its defense. And we remember those who were brutally murdered in terror attacks. On Yom HaZikaron, the entire nation remembers its debt and expresses eternal gratitude to its sons and daughters who gave their lives for the achievement of the country's independence and its continued existence. On this day, we the living, rededicate ourselves to the State of Israel, so it will be worthy of the sacrifice of those who died for its survival. In Israel, we have two memorial days on which the siren wails. Yom HaZikaron, to remind us the cost of having a state of our own, and Yom HaShoah, to remind us the cost of not. Yom HaZikaron is ushered in with a 1-minute air raid siren, during which the country comes to a halt. The following morning at 11 a.m., there is another siren, this time for 2 minutes. During these times, those driving on the motorway stop their cars in the middle of the road to get out and stand in remembrance. A whole office will stop working, and a family having dinner will stop eating in order to spend a minute in respectful silence. For one day a year, we put all our differences aside and come together Ki'ish Echad Belev Echad, as one people with one heart, to pay tribute to those who have fallen so that we can live. a student in the Kol Torah Yeshiva in Yerushalayim, once approached his Rosh Yeshiva, the great Rosh Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, and asked him a question. May I leave my Torah studies in the yeshiva to go and pray at the graves of Tzaddikim in the Galil in northern Israel? Rav Auerbach answered, it is better to stay in yeshiva and study Torah. The student replied, isn't there a time I could go to visit the graves of Tzaddikim? Doesn't Rav Auerbach go and pray by the graves of Tzaddikim? Rav Auerbach answered, in order to pray at the graves of Tzaddikim, one does not have to travel up to the Galil. Whenever I feel the need to pray at the graves of Tzaddikim, I go to Mount Herzl, to the graves of the soldiers who fell al Kiddush Hashem for the sanctification of God's name. Since last Yom Hazikaron, 3 more soldiers and civilians have given their lives whilst defending the state of Israel and in acts of terror. May the memories of these Kedoshim be a blessing. Yehi Zichram Baruch.
הודעה נמסרה למשפחות.
כאן קודקוד, אנו יוצאים למבצע הפגיעה בחמאס על מנת להשיב את השקט לאזרחי ישראל. העם בגבכם, מחזיק לכם מחבלי החמאס והג'יהאד. סומך עליכם, בטוח ביכולתכם, צאו להתקפה, בהצלחה, סוף.
אזרחי ישראל, לב האומה כולה עם משפחות הנופלים. אנחנו כואבים את כאבכם. אנחנו מרכינים ראש בפני בנינו שנפלו, כדי שנוכל להמשיך לחיות כאן בארצנו. אני מבקש להביע בשם ממשלת ישראל וכל עם ישראל את הכאב העמוק שאנחנו חשים. אנחנו שולחים את תנחומינו להורים, לילדים, לבנות הזוג ולמשפחות של חיילי צה"ל שנפלו בקרב על הגנת מדינת ישראל. אני מבקש לומר לכם שאין מלחמה צודקת מזאת שבניכם, בנינו, נפלו בה בגבורה. בכל קרב, בכל מערכה, יש אירועים מורכבים וקשים, וכך גם במערכה הנוכחית. אבל יחד עם זאת, הפעולה הצבאית מתקדמת כמתוכנן, והיא תתרחב ככל שידרש, עד שהשקט ישוב לאזרחי ישראל. למשפחות היקרות אני מבקש לומר, אני מודע לדאגה שלכם. כולנו שותפים לה. אנחנו עושים הכל כדי לשמור על חיי האזרחים שלנו, וכן גם על חיי החיילים שלנו.
הודעה נמסרה למשפחות.
Rav Yisrael Zev Gustman was one of the great rabbis of Europe of the previous generation. At just age 20, he was appointed a Dayan in the Bet Din of Vilna. But as the Nazis rose to power, he was forced to flee. Eventually, he settled in Israel, where he had a small yeshiva in Rechavia in Yerushalayim. He was relatively unknown, but on Thursday afternoons, the yeshiva would fill to capacity. Rabbis, intellectuals, judges, and professors would come and take part in a high-level shir that gave a taste of the Talmud from pre-war Europe. Amongst those participants was a professor at the Hebrew University and future Nobel Prize winner Yisrael Olman. And then the year was 1982. Once again, Israel was at war. Soldiers were mobilized, reserve units activated. Amongst those called to duty was a reserve soldier, a university student who made his living as a high school teacher, Shlomo Alman, Professor Yisrael Alman's son. And on the eve of the 19th of Sivan, in particularly fierce combat, Shlomo fell in battle. Rav Gustman mobilized his yeshiva. All of his students joined him, performing the mitzvah of burying the dead. At the cemetery, Rav Gustman was agitated. He surveyed the rows of graves of the young men soldiers who died defending the land. On the way back from the cemetery, Rav Gustman turned to another passenger in the car and said, "They are all holy." Another passenger questioned the rabbi, "Even the non-religious soldiers?" Rav Gustman replied, "Every single one of them." He then turned to the driver and said, "Take me now to Professor Orman's home." The family had just returned from the cemetery and would now begin the week of Shiva, mourning for their son, brother, husband, and father. Rav Gustman entered and asked to sit next to Professor Alman, who said, "Rabbi, I so appreciate you coming to the cemetery, but now is the time for you to return to your yeshiva." Rav Gustman spoke, first in Yiddish and then in Hebrew, so that all those assembled would understand. "I'm sure you don't know this. I had a son named Meir. He was a beautiful child. He was taken from my arms and executed. I escaped. I later bartered my child's shoes so that we would have food, but I was never able to eat that food. I gave it away to others. My Meir is a Kadosh. He is holy. He and all the 6 million who perished are holy." Rav Gustman then added, "I will tell you what is transpiring now in the world of truth, in Gan Eden, in heaven. My Meir is welcoming your Shlomo into the minyan and is saying to him, 'I died because I am a Jew, but I wasn't able to save anyone else. But you, Shlomo, you died defending the Jewish people and the land of Israel. My Meir is a Kadosh. He is holy. But your Shlomo is a Shaliach Tzibor, a cantor in that holy, heavenly minyan." Rav Gustman continued, "I never had the opportunity to sit shiva for my Meir. Let me sit here with you just a little while longer." In June 2014, 3 Israeli teenagers, Naftali Frankel, Gilad She'er, and Eyal Lifrach, were last seen hitchhiking a ride home. Once their disappearance became known, for 2.5 weeks, Am Yisrael came together like never before. Tehillim were said, mass rallies were arranged at the Kotel in Yerushalayim and Tel Aviv. An entire nation held its breath in hopeful anticipation of their safe return. But it was not to be. On June 30th, the devastating news was received that their bodies had been found. The 3 boys had been killed, probably moments after they were kidnapped. In the months following, the boys' friends wanted to write a song in their memory. Leading singers from Israel and around the world joined in the project. The following video shows the journey of hope, uncertainty, pain and prayer that was undertaken that fateful summer by their families, their friends, and an entire nation when the boys went missing. May their memory be a blessing.
פתח לבך ברחמים על בניך, כולם לדורות יישמע, בשמיים ניצבים לעד דבריך, ובארץ אמצא לנו נחמה. פתח לבך ברחמים על בניך, קולם לדורות יישמע, בשמיים ניצבים לעד דבריך, ובארץ אמצא לנו נחמה.
לך היו 3 לאחיו, וציוו לנו חיים.
עלו לתומם כאייל נקר על מזבח הבנים.
שמיים בחו מעל הגלעד, והארץ רעשה.
מתוך נפתולי הלב שרעד, חייכו בתמונה 3.
פתח לבך ברחמים על בניך, כולם לדורות יישמע, בשמיים ניצבים לעד דבריך, ובארץ אמצא לנו נחמה.
ובין מצרים בקרוב עליי נראים, התגלו במסך האבק.
שקרים שבתוך מנהרות מסתתרים, מזימות שנאמרו למרחב.
הרוח נשבה ישנה חדשה, וקרבה לבבות רחוקים. מתוך תעצומות הנפש ביקשה
לא ליפול גם כשלא מבינים.
בתוך הטירוף
בין מרדף לנרדף תעלה זעקה
לשלום הנכסף והעם שעייף
משנאת החינם
יתאחד בחיבוק אחים.
השמיים ניצבים לעד דבריך, ובארץ המצא לנו נחמה. המצא לנו נחמה. מי שברך אבותינו אברהם יצחק ויעקב הוא יברך את חיילי.
A year after conclusion of Tzuk Eitan, Operation Protective Edge, a moving ceremony took place at the Kotel in the presence of the President of Israel, the Defense Minister, the IDF Chief of Staff, and the Chief Rabbis of the State of Israel. 75 Sifrei Torah had been brought from around the world and were dedicated in memory of the soldiers who'd have given their lives during the fighting. And alongside those 75 newly dedicated scrolls stood one more. It was the Sefer Torah that had been held by Rosh Shlomo Goren, then Chief Rabbi of the IDF, and brought to the Kotel when it was liberated in 1967. Now, some 50 years later, it returned to once again bear witness to the eternity of the Jewish people. As Israel's President Reuben said at that ceremony, the Torah marches with the Jewish nation during highs and lows, good and bad. The Torah accompanied us in our wanderings, in our exile, and will accompany us in our redemption. You are listening to Misheberach for Chayalei Tzahal, the prayer for the soldiers of the IDF, as it was recited that day at the Kotel alongside 76 Sifrei Torah.
הוא יברך את חיילי צבא ההגנה לישראל, הוא יברך את חיילי צבא ההגנה לישראל.
On Yom Hazikaron, we remember the bravery and courage of our soldiers. We salute them, their self-sacrifice, and feel the pain of the ultimate price they were forced to pay. But despite the pain and the loss, or perhaps because of it, we feel a hope towards the future. The message of this day is not to fall into despair. Rather, it is to remember and to reflect and to recognize our debt of gratitude to those whose sacrifice made possible the rebirth of our nation in its ancient homeland. And the greatest honor we can give to those who died is to continue living. Today, we bow our heads, honoring their memory and thanking them for their sacrifice. And then as Yom Hazikaron abruptly ends and Yom Ha'atzmaut begins, we will hold our heads high and proudly declare in their merit and with thanks to Hashem, Am Yisrael Chai, the Jewish people lives.